What's going on, guys? I'm CFB Kings, and welcome back to another episode of the CFBKings Show. Really appreciate you tuning in today. College football is here. It's game week. We've got week 0 coming up this Saturday, and it's about to be the best time of the year. The season kicks off in just a couple short days, and we're officially in to the week preview portion of the show. We're going to be previewing week 0, mainly looking at Florida State, Georgia Tech out in Ireland, but also quick looks into the other 3 games on Saturday as well. Make sure to stick around to the end because I'm going to be giving my 2024 college football playoff predictions and breaking down why I placed each team where I did. But first, let's preview week 0. We've got the number 10 Florida State Seminoles and the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets kicking things off out in Dublin, Ireland. The good old Aer Lingus College Football Classic. Florida State is an 11.5 point favorite, and the over-under is 56.5, meaning that the sportsbooks and Vegas project that the score for this game is going to be somewhere around 34-23 Florida State. So I think this game has potential to be very interesting, just going off that spread and projected score alone. That's not really a huge gap. I mean, 34-23 could mean it's a 4-point game with a couple minutes left, and FSU gets a turnover and goes and tacks on a late touchdown or something to pull away. But it's also in Ireland, tons of traveling. It's the very first game of the season. A lot of variables that can come into play to make this a really unique game. Going back to 2023, a little recap for both teams. Florida State, of course, went 13-1, 13-0 with their mostly full roster. They're the reigning champions of the ACC and look to defend that title in 2024. But they returned just 56% of their production from last season, which is 91st in the FBS. They lost a ton of people off last year's team, most notably quarterback Jordan Travis, who was 5th in Heisman voting, wide receivers Keon Coleman and Johnny Wilson, running back Trey Benson, tight end Jaheim Bell, defensive lineman Jared Verse and Braden Fisk, as well as defensive backs Renardo Green and Jarian Jones. Linebacker Tatum Bethune, all these guys went to the NFL draft. But they did add Oregon State transfer and former Clemson Tiger DJ Uiagalelei at quarterback. They got Alabama transfer running back Roydell Williams, LSU transfer receiver Jalen Brown, and Alabama transfer receiver Malik Benson. So they have replaced some of those guys that they lost from last season, but there has been a significant roster turnover. They had the number 11 overall recruiting class, bringing in a bunch of highly rated recruits to help supplement those losses as well. And they look to have another talented roster again this season. But with that transfer portal strategy, they had 17 players transfer in and 22 transfer out. So there's a lot of unknown year to year with how they approach the portal. But with all those new pieces and how they might gel together, there's a little bit of a mystery there. But they certainly have the talent and potential to pick up right where they left off last season and contend for the ACC again. Georgia Tech went 7-6 last year, but they had a very strange season in terms of who they beat and who they lost to. Part of what makes me really intrigued in the potential for this to be a close and exciting game is that for basically all of last season and really under head coach Brent Key's entire tenure at Georgia Tech, the Yellow Jackets have always played to the level of their opponent, and often that means better than their good opponents and worse than their bad opponents. For example, last year Georgia Tech lost to Bowling Green by double digits, but then beat number 17 Miami a week later. They lost by 15 to Boston College, who went 7-6, and then beat number 17 North Carolina a week after that. They lost by 5 points to the eventual ACC runner-up Louisville, who won 10 games, and that was a game that Georgia Tech led by 15 at the half. And then to end the season, the Yellow Jackets played a one-possession game with number 1 Georgia, and it was really even closer than the score depicted. Georgia Tech had a play right before the half where they were inches away from scoring another touchdown and then missed a field goal too. So they lost by double digits to Bowling Green, but beat number 17 Miami, number 17 North Carolina, nearly beat Louisville, who was in the ACC championship game, and nearly ended number 1 Georgia's, at the time, 28-game win streak. They returned 66% of their production from last year, most notably starting quarterback Haynes King, who accounted for 3,579 total yards and 37 total touchdowns. They also bring back starting running back Jamal Haynes, who had over 1,000 yards rushing, and their top 2 receivers in Eric Singleton Jr. and Malik Rutherford. They also bring back their top 2 tacklers in Kyle Efford and Clayton Powell-Lee, and then added USC transfer edge Romello Height, who was 3rd on the team for the Trojans last year in sacks. So this is a game that I think has a lot of potential to be really exciting, to be close, to get the season started off with a bang, and I do think Florida State will win it, but there's a high likelihood that I'll end up taking Georgia Tech to at least cover that 11.5 point spread. I also wanted to briefly touch on the other 3 games this Saturday, especially Montana State at New Mexico. This one caught my eye because if you don't know, Montana State is in the FCS, but New Mexico is an FBS team. They're in the Mountain West Conference, but FCS Montana State is a 9-point favorite on the road at New Mexico. Montana State has been a regular in the FCS playoffs over the last 6 years, and New Mexico has not been quite as good. They haven't had a season of over 500 since 2016, but still nearly a double-digit spread for an FCS team over an FBS team on the road, and that's pretty crazy. We also have SMU at Nevada. SMU's first game as a Power 4 team. They're a 4-touchdown favorite over the Wolfpack. That's 8 p.m. Eastern on CBS Sports Network. Then Delaware State at Hawaii to wrap Week 0 up, kicking off at 11:59 p.m. Eastern. I'll probably be dialed in till about 3 a.m. Eastern here on the East Coast for that one. But yeah, Week 0, college football is just days, hours, minutes away, and I'm really looking forward to it. Now, I wanted to move on to the next segment. I wanted to give my official 2024 college football playoff predictions. If you follow the Instagram or Twitter pages at CFBKings, you might have seen them last week. They drew quite the reaction, but I wanted to feature it here on the show too to be able to go more in depth and explain why I placed each team where I did. So, no, it's not clickbait. No, it's not engagement bait. You're already here, but I don't really operate like that. But I do realize that my prediction does look a bit different from most of the others and feature some teams that a lot of people aren't considering for the college football playoff this year. So, but I think I can make a sufficient case for each one of them. So if you've been out of the college football loop for a bit or just forgot after it was announced a while ago, the college football playoff has tripled in size from 4 teams to 12 teams, much to my dismay. If you don't know, I'm not super in favor of tripling the CFP bracket, but that's a past conversation. It's also going to expand to 14 teams in 2 years, so they've already decided to expand again without even having the 12-team format ever be played yet. So that's cool, not really, but that's a conversation for a different time. This 12-team format features 5 auto bids for the 5 highest-ranked conference champions. The 4 highest-ranked conference champions will be seeded from number 1 to number 4, and then the 5th highest-ranked conference champion can be anywhere from 5 to 12. So the top 4 champs will pretty much always be those from the SEC, ACC, Big 10, and Big 12. And then the highest-ranked group of 5 champion will get that 5th auto bid and can be in any of the other 8 spots. The top 4 will get first-round bye weeks, while number 9 plays number 8, 10 plays 7, 11 plays 6, and 12 plays 5. And those matchups will all take place in the home stadium of the higher-ranked team. So let's get into it. At number 1, and as the champions of the SEC, I have Texas. I know a lot of people are probably thinking, oh, it's Texas, they're overrated again, stuff like that, but in each of the last 2 seasons, Texas has finished higher than their preseason ranking. Last year, they were preseason number 11 and finished number 3. In 2022, they were unranked in the preseason poll and finished number 25, so a slight improvement. But Steve Sarkisian has been there for 3 years, and they've finished with more wins in every season than the year before and finished higher than their preseason ranking in 2 of those 3 years. So they've shown progression not only year over year, but throughout those seasons as well. They had 5 wins in 2021, 8 wins in 2022, and 12 wins in 2023. And going back to last season, if you don't remember, Texas beat Alabama by 10 points in Tuscaloosa, and Alabama eventually won the SEC championship last year. So Texas brings back Quinn Ewers and Arch Manning at quarterback, but they did lose wide receivers Xavier Worthy and A.D. Mitchell. To replace them, they added Isaiah Bond from Alabama. Bond had 668 yards and 4 touchdowns last year for the Tide, and their second best wide receiver in terms of number of receiving yards. They also added Silas Bolden from Oregon State. He had 746 yards and 5 touchdowns last year. He was the Beavers wide receiver 1. As well as Houston transfer Matthew Golden, who had 988 yards and 13 touchdowns over the past 2 years for the Cougars. So they lose Worthy and Mitchell, but got a bunch of good transfers to try to supplement those losses and keep that group strong. They bring back a lot of production on defense, and they added a bunch of solid transfers and recruits. They'll be stacked again on that side of the ball, and I think Texas will have a season similar to that of last year and be right back in the college football playoff and national championship discussions. At number 2, and as the champions of the ACC, I have the Clemson Tigers. If you haven't watched my season preview of Clemson, I highly recommend it. I offer more explanation in that video than what I'm about to give for why I think Clemson could be very good this season, just for time's sake. But in short, last season Clemson was one of the youngest teams in the country. According to Pro Football Focus, the Tigers had freshmen take a combined total of 3,991 snaps. Nearly 4,000 snaps last season were taken by freshmen, which is nearly 850 more than the second team on the list, which is South Carolina, and nearly 12 or over 1,200 more than the third team on the list in Miami, who I'll talk about later. Clemson was very injured at points last year, primarily at wide receiver. They lost to Florida State because of a missed chip shot field goal. The kicker that attempted that field goal wasn't on the roster until week 4 and actually lived in an entirely different part of the state of South Carolina up until the week before that game. They beat themselves on multiple occasions. They fumbled 4 different times at the 1-yard line, twice against Duke and twice against Miami. Both games they ended up losing. But they do bring back QB1 in Cade Klubnik, running back 1 in Phil Maffa, wide receiver 1 in Tyler Brown, and wide receiver 1 from 2022 in Antonio Williams. He was hurt for most of last season. They also had 5-star wide receiver TJ Moore and 4-star wide receiver Bryant Wesco. 2 young recruits that are going to make a major impact for the Tigers this year. They bring back starting tight end and Jake Brenningstool. PFF projects them to have the best linebacker unit in the country, led by Barrett Carter, who was recently rated by EA Sports as the number 1 linebacker in college football 25. They get back Vic Burley, a 5-star defensive lineman in the class of 2023 who got hurt in fall camp last year and missed all of last season, so it's basically just like adding another 5-star to their 2024 class. They made some personnel changes and hired Matt Luke to coach their offensive line. Luke won a national championship as offensive line coach with Georgia in 2021. And like I was saying before, Clemson was one of the youngest teams in the country. They had several notable injuries. They were very, very close to winning a number of games against Duke, Miami, Florida State who won the ACC title, and they really weren't as far off from having a 10 or 11 win season as a lot of people seem to think, and I think the Tigers will surprise a lot of people this season and reclaim that ACC title and get back to the college football playoff. At number 3, and as champions of the Big Ten, I have the Ohio State Buckeyes. OSU went 11-2 last year, 11-1 in the regular season, and then a loss to Missouri in the Cotton Bowl when they were kind of riddled with opt-outs. But they added Kansas State transfer Will Howard at quarterback, who was recently named starter last week. They also have some serious depth behind him with Devin Brown, Julian Sayin, and Aaron Nolan, 2 young recruits there in Sayin and Nolan. But they added Ole Miss transfer running back Quinshon Judkins to pair with Travion Henderson. They lost Marvin Harrison Jr. and Julian Fleming at wide receiver, but added 5-star freshman Jeremiah Smith and returned guys like Emeka Ibuka and Carnell Tate. On defense, they finished second in the country last year in points per game allowed at just 11.2. They bring back a good portion of that group in guys like Jack Sawyer, JT Tuimoloau, Davison Igbinosun, Denzel Burke, and added Caleb Downs, one of the most dynamic defenders in all of college football. He led Alabama in total tackles last year as a freshman. So I think Ohio State will return to the top of the Big Ten as Michigan takes a slight step back this year, and the Buckeyes will make another trip to the college football playoff. At number 4, and as champions of the Big 12, I have the Texas Tech Red Raiders. This was one that most people on social media were surprised by, said was ridiculous, all that sort of stuff. But I actually do believe in the potential that Texas Tech has for this season and believe that they can win the Big 12. So similar to Clemson, I made a season preview for Texas Tech, and make sure to go check that out if you haven't seen it. It's a really in-depth breakdown for the Red Raiders 2024 season. A lot more information than I'm about to give right now just for time's sake. But Texas Tech had a couple major injuries at quarterback last year. They lost their starter in Tyler Shuck for the season in week 4 during their first Big 12 game of the year. They brought in backup Baron Morton, who also got hurt. He separated his shoulder blade from his collarbone in his throwing arm. And not only did he play the rest of the game, but finished the next 8 weeks of the season with it. So they were very banged up at quarterback, but returned Morton, who is almost back to full health. They got better at wide receiver. They added Washington State's wide receiver 1 in Josh Kelly, who had 923 yards and 8 touchdowns last year for the Cougars. They added 5-star wide receiver recruit Micah Hudson, who is the highest rated recruit that Texas Tech has ever had, according to 24/7 System. They bring back their top 2 tacklers and the majority of their production on defense. Their losses last season, other than to Texas, who was by 50, but they were all very much due to their own turnovers and mistakes. They lost to Wyoming in double overtime, a game that they led 17-0. They missed 3 field goals in that game. They lost to Oregon by 8, and they were -4 in the turnover margin, and still led the Ducks by 9 in the fourth quarter. They outgained BYU by 112 yards, but were -5 in the turnover margin. That was with their third-string quarterback, Jake Strong. I think that was the only game that neither Shuck or Morton played in, but they outgained Kansas State in total yardage and lost that game as well. But their head coach, Joey McGuire, is really building something serious in Lubbock. Their best 2 seasons of the past decade have both come in McGuire's first 2 seasons as the head coach. They did not have a winning record in Big 12 play from 2014 to 2021, I think, and have had a winning record each of the last 2 seasons with McGuire at the helm. Also, most notably, they bring back running back Taj Brooks, who was 4th in the country in rushing yards last year, and among returning running backs, he is 2nd behind just Oklahoma State's Ollie Gordon. So they're very deep in the backfield, very talented in the backfield, and Brooks will be a major key for them this year. Texas Tech doesn't play Utah, they don't play Kansas State, and they don't play Kansas. That's 3 of the top 4 teams in odds to win the Big 12. And lastly, I think the Big 12 is going to be one of the most balanced, unpredictable, and really just fun conferences to watch this season. And I think that Texas Tech has the pieces, the coach, and the schedule to come out on top of it. At number 5, as the runner-up in the SEC, I have the Ole Miss Rebels. The Rebels went 11-2 last year. Their only losses were to Alabama and Georgia. They put up 540 yards and 38 points on Penn State in the Peach Bowl. And before that game, the Nittany Lions had the number 1 defense in the country in terms of yards per game allowed, and the Rebels just torched them. They lost running back Quinshon Judkins, but returned Ulysses Bentley IV, who had 627 total yards and 5 total touchdowns last year. They added Miami transfer Henry Parrish Jr. He led the Canes in rushing yards with 625 and 6 touchdowns. They also added LSU transfer Logan Diggs and Georgia State transfer Dominique Thomas. Thomas originally started his career at Clemson. They also added guys like South Carolina transfer wide receiver Antoine Wells, Florida transfer edge Princely Umanmielen, Arkansas linebacker Chris Paul Jr., 5-star Texas A&M transfer Walter Nolan, and 4-star Virginia Tech transfer tight end Daquan Wright. They bring back starting quarterback in Jackson Dart, who is near the top of the preseason Heisman odds, and they brought in the number 1 transfer portal class, a lot of good recruits. Overall, they'll have one of the most talented rosters in the country, and if a few things fall into place, they could be in that SEC championship game and 12-team college football playoff this fall. At number 6, runner-up in the ACC, I have the Miami Hurricanes. This is another one that a lot of people on social media didn't like, not for any real reason that I could discover other than that they've been overrated in the past, but this 2024 Miami team isn't like some of those others in recent seasons. I previewed them as well last week or 2 weeks ago. Definitely check out that video if you haven't yet, but the Canes have serious potential to make 2024 a turning point for the program. At quarterback, they lost their starter in Tyler Van Dyke, who transferred to Wisconsin, and third-string quarterback Ja'Curry Brown, who transferred to UCF. But they added Cam Ward from Washington State. Ward accounted for 7,170 yards and 61 touchdowns over the past 2 seasons for the Cougars, and he brings a dynamic playmaking ability at quarterback that they haven't seen down there in Miami in a while. They added Oregon State transfer running back Damian Martinez, who had 1,185 yards and 9 touchdowns last year for the Beavers. He was the number 2 running back in the 2024 transfer cycle, behind just Quinshon Judkins. They bring back 6 of their top 8 wide receivers, and most importantly, their top 2 in Xavier Restrepo and Jacoby George, as well as add Houston transfer Sam Brown, who had 813 yards and 3 touchdowns last year for the Cougars, and to that group, they add 3 4-star wide receiver recruits. On defense, they are loaded. They bring back guys like Ruben Bain, Wesley Besaint, and Francisco Mauminoa. They added Tyler Barron, an edge from Tennessee, who had 10.5 tackles for loss and 6 sacks last year. They get back tackle Akeem Mesidor, who was injured for the majority of last season, and added tackles Simeon Barrow Jr. from Michigan State and CJ Clark from NC State. The Canes also have one of the best kickers in the country in Andres Borregales. He was a finalist for the Lou Groza Award for the best kicker in all of college football last year, and games are frequently won and lost on field goals, so that's a major weapon for Miami that often goes unnoticed. At number 7, I have the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Under the new college football playoff format, the Irish can never be in the CFP top 4 and get one of those auto bid spots because they have no conference title to win, so the highest they can ever be is number 5, but I think a couple of those conference championship runner-ups won't be punished and dropped behind Notre Dame for losing in a weekend that the Irish will never play in. So I have Notre Dame at number 7. They're another team that I did basically a season preview for earlier in the summer or late in the spring, but according to the ESPN FPI, Notre Dame has the highest chance of any team to go undefeated this season with a 15.8% chance to do so. They lost Sam Hartman at quarterback, but they added Duke transfer Riley Leonard. They bring back 2 stars in safety Xavier Watts, who won the Bronco Nagurski Trophy last season, which is given to the best defender in the country. He had the most interceptions of any player in college football with 7. They also bring back Benjamin Morrison, who ESPN recently ranked as the 12th best overall player in college football this season. They had a phenomenal recruiting and transfer class, but potentially their biggest addition was when they hired former LSU offensive coordinator Mike Denbrock to be their new offensive coordinator. He led the Tigers to the best offense in the country last year and assisted Jaden Daniels in winning that Heisman Trophy. Head coach Marcus Freeman is going into his 3rd year with the Irish. He's got a couple seasons to look back at, learn from, and now they can head into 2024 with some real college football playoff expectations. At number 8, I have the Oregon Ducks. I think Oregon will have a very talented team this year and certainly be a contender for that Big Ten title. I have them as the runner-up to Ohio State. I just don't quite think that they will win it in their first season in the conference, so I have them losing to the Buckeyes in the Big Ten championship, but the Ducks will have one of the best receiving groups, if not the best receiving group in all of college football, with Tez Johnson, Texas A&M transfer Evan Stewart, and Trayshawn Holden, as well as recruits like 4-star Jeremiah McClellan, 4-star Ryan Pelham, and 4-star Dylan Gresham. So an absolutely loaded receiving core. They have a stacked defense too, returning guys like Jordan Birch and Mateo Uyunglele, and adding very talented transfers like Washington transfer Jabbar Muhammad, among many others. So I think the Ducks will be solid, just right outside that conference champion realm at number 8. At number 9, I have the Georgia Bulldogs. This was another one that caused some negativity, to put it lightly, in the comments, but I think the Dogs will take just a slight step back from where they were last year. I don't think they'll be bad, obviously, but with one loss last season, the committee dropped them to number 6. So if they were to happen to lose multiple games, I think that number 9 could be a likely landing spot for them. The reason that I believe they could see multiple losses is their absurd schedule for this season. Georgia plays number 14 Clemson at a neutral site in week 1. They go to Kentucky for their first SEC game. That's already scheduled for 7:30 p.m. Eastern on ABC. The week after that, they go to Alabama to take on the Crimson Tide. That one, too, is scheduled for 7:30 p.m. Eastern on ABC. They go to Texas to take on the preseason number 4 Longhorns. They play Florida at a neutral site in Jacksonville. They go to preseason number 6 Ole Miss, and then back home to face preseason number 15 Tennessee. So number 14 Clemson, at Kentucky at night, at number 5 Alabama at night, at number 4 Texas, at number 6 Ole Miss, Florida at a neutral site, number 15 Tennessee, then throw in Auburn, who was one of the closest teams to beating them in the regular season all of last year, Georgia Tech, who played them within one possession, and Mississippi State as well. So they go on the road to number 4, number 5, and number 6. Then they have 2 other top 15 teams and get just one of them at home. So 4 top 15 games away from Sanford Stadium. And then neutral site against Florida. Can't overlook the Gators. They are the last program to beat Georgia in a regular season game. And that was in 2020, which is ridiculous. But then that Kentucky game too. In their last 2 trips to Lexington, they have scored 14 points and 16 points. Their season low point total in 2020 was on the road at Kentucky, and their season low point total in 2022 was on the road at Kentucky. So for whatever reason, they have not been able to score much there lately, and those, of course, were very, very good teams. in 2022, the Dogs went 15-0 and won the national title and scored 16 points in Lexington. So definitely not a game they can overlook. And that Kentucky team has also kind of beefed up their roster from last season with they got a transfer quarterback from Georgia. They got a transfer linebacker from Georgia. They got a transfer running back from Ohio State. They returned a star at wide receiver and Berrien Brown. So definitely not a matchup going into a hostile environment in the very first SEC game of the season. So not a matchup that the Dogs can overlook. And another note, their season low point total in 2021 was 10 points, and that was against Clemson at a neutral site, a matchup that they also have in 2024, and another season, again, where they were obviously very good. They won the national title that year, but scored 10 points on Clemson in a neutral site stadium. So Kirby Smart and the Dogs lost in their last trip to Tuscaloosa. They lost in their last trip to Ole Miss. There is just way too much potential for losses on this schedule, and of course, I don't think they'll lose all of them or anything, but I can definitely see them losing one. I can definitely see them losing two, and I don't think they get through it unscathed. At number 10, I have Ollie Gordon and the Oklahoma State Cowboys. Gordon led the country in rushing last year with 1,732 yards, as well as 21 rushing touchdowns. He finished 7th in Heisman voting and led the Cowboys to notable victories over Kansas State, Kansas, West Virginia, Oklahoma, and Texas A&M as they finished AP number 16 last year. In addition to Gordon, they returned Alan Bowman, their top two wide receivers in Brennan Presley and Rashad Owens, who combined for nearly 2,000 yards and 13 touchdowns last year. And on defense, they bring back their top four tacklers in linebacker Nick Martin, safety Kendall Daniels, safety Trey Rucker, and edge Colin Oliver. Martin notably had 140 total tackles, 16 tackles for loss, 6 sacks, and 2 interceptions last year. And Oliver had 73 total tackles, 15.5 tackles for loss, 6 sacks, and 4 forced fumbles last season for the Cowboys. I think Mike Gundy will have Oak State to be in position to not only contend for the Big 12 title, have them as the runner-up to Texas Tech, but if they get to the CFP, I can definitely see them winning a game or two there as well. At number 11, I have the Penn State Nittany Lions. This was definitely one of the hardest spots to choose. I also strongly considered Missouri and Alabama. They were right on the edge as well, but I ended up going with Penn State because not only do they have a very talented team that I think will be improved from last season, but this is just kind of where they always seem to find themselves. In the final college football playoff rankings, it's actually pretty shocking, but in the final CFP Top 25 in 2017, they were number 9. In 2018, they were number 12. In 2019, they were number 10. In 2022, they were number 11. And in 2023, they were number 10. This has just been their territory lately, right around 10 to 12. And I think they'll be on the edge of the college football playoff again this season. I think Penn State is one of the programs that the expansion of the playoff will help the most because they just always seem to kind of lose to Michigan and Ohio State, but beat everybody else and be right on the edge of contention. So I think they'll benefit greatly from this expanded CFP. And in all of those seasons that I just mentioned, they had 2 losses in each of them except for 2018. And 2024 is another season where they have a couple of games that I wouldn't be shocked if they lost, but a lot of games that I expect them to win. With the Big Ten expanding and the removal of divisions, they no longer play Michigan annually, but this fall, they travel on the road to West Virginia in week 1, potential loss there. They cross the country to number 23 USC. They go to Wisconsin. They do get Ohio State at home, but it's still Ohio State. Then Washington's a bit of a wild card with all the changes that they've had lately. And then at Purdue, the Boilermakers love to beat highly ranked teams at home. So in 2022, Penn State went 10-2, finished number 11, like I mentioned. Very solid team, but Purdue led them with under a minute, and the Nittany Lions needed a late touchdown to win by 4. So potential loss there. Again, I expect Penn State to be very good, very competitive like they almost always are, but I also see the likelihood for a 10-2 season like they've had a lot lately. At number 12, the champions of the AAC and the highest ranked group of 5 champion, I have the Memphis Tigers. This was another one that a lot of people didn't get, but last season, Memphis went 10-3 and had the 6th best offense in the country, scoring almost 40 points per game. Their 3 losses last year came by 7 to Missouri, by 10 to Tulane, and by 4 to SMU. All 3 of those teams had 11 wins. Their only losses were to teams who each had 11 wins, which is pretty crazy. But Missouri won the Cotton Bowl over Ohio State, SMU won the American title, and Tulane was the runner-up in the American. So all very good teams. From last season's squad, Memphis returned 70% of its returning production, which is the 21st most in the country, including starting quarterback Seth Hennigan, who accounted for 4,157 total yards and 37 total touchdowns. They bring back 3 of their top 4 wide receivers in Rock Taylor, Demir Blankensee, and Kobe Drake, and their top tackler in Chandler Martin, who had 95 total tackles, 17 tackles for loss, 3 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, and a pick 6 last year. Another thing to note is that reigning champion of the American, SMU, is no longer in that conference. They have since left for the ACC, and Tulane, who won the American title in 2022 and who was in the American Championship last year, their head coach Willie Fritz left and took the job at Houston. He led the Green Wave to a 23-4 record over the past 2 seasons. So SMU's out of the conference, Tulane's head coach is gone, and then if you go back to 2020 and 2021, those American titles were both won by Cincinnati, who of course is in the Big 12 now. A lot of the major roadblocks for Memphis are no longer there, and this seems like a perfect opportunity for the Tigers to reclaim that top spot in the AAC, and if they do, they'll be in contention for that Group of 5 CFP auto bid. So there it is, my official 2024 college football playoff prediction. If you saw it on Instagram or Twitter last week and thought it was crazy, I hope this episode was able to give you some more insight into why I picked these teams and why I placed them where I did. And yeah, like I said, it's not engagement bait, not clickbait. This is genuinely what I believe could happen in the 2024 season, and it's going to be an exciting one to see how it all unfolds. So that's going to wrap it up. Make sure to leave a like if you enjoyed. If you like what you heard today, make sure to follow CFB Kings on Twitter and Instagram for all things college football. Thank you so much for watching. Have a fantastic rest of your day, and take care.